Hey everyone, and thank you for clicking on my channel. Today I have a very exciting episode for you. I have my friend Sam with me, and we are going to have a couple of questions that we're going to ask her. And I just like the idea of creating something that's new and different, and hopefully I can have more of these episodes where we can just have other autistics sharing their experience of being on the autistic spectrum, and especially women who are late diagnosed. That's something that I'm really tapping into on this channel. So, yes, here is Sam, and I would just like you to introduce yourself, Sam, and say who do you live with, and a random icebreaker question. What's your favorite season?
Okay. Hello, it's lovely to be here. Thank you for having me. So I'm Sam. I am 30 and I live with my husband and my two sons who are 2 and 5. Yeah, we live in Scotland in Angus. And my favorite season, I think it's going to sound so boring, but I think it is summer because I'm really affected by the dark in the winter. Although sensory wise, I'd much rather be wrapped up in in many layers. But the constant kind of dark, especially living in Scotland, really gets to me. So I like the long summer days where I can get out on my paddleboard in the evening and just enjoy that. So yeah, that's my favorite season.
I couldn't agree more. I really struggle in the winter too with these dark days that we get in Scotland. This it's always raining or it's always dark. And yeah, the sunshine is so much nicer in Scotland anyway.
Definitely.
Okay, so my first question for you is when did you first discover that you were autistic? Kind of like when did the journey start for you?
Okay, so I started looking. My son, my second son, was born in 2022 in March. And not long after, my mum actually came up to visit one day and said, there's been a report thing on the radio that I was listening to, and it was all about ADHD. And I think it sounds very similar to the way that you describe your experience to me. And I'd never even considered anything like that before. But in standard fashion, started deep diving into this straight away. I was Googling, I was on lots of different social media channels, and all these things were coming up. And I was like, oh, okay, yeah, this does sound very familiar. But there was still something missing. And as someone who has had many diagnoses in my life of like depression, anxiety, I was diagnosed with postnatal depression, I've had lots of things. I was kind of like, is this just another one of those things that kind of fits but kind of doesn't? And then I started having videos about autistic people popping up. And I was kind of like, oh, but I really resonate with that. And it was like it was almost filling the gaps. So from there, so that was kind of mid 2022. And then from there, it just kind of turned into this complete hyperfixation. I was like writing constantly. I had notepads everywhere. I was taking notes on my phone when things were coming up, gathering so much information. And then all of a sudden, one day, I kind of presented this almost like a filofax type style thing to my husband. And I was like, I think I might be autistic and ADHD. And he was like, huh? And I was like, here's all this stuff. I genuinely think this might be the missing piece that I have been looking for forever. And he kind of went through and really started to connect the dots from his point of view. And then from there, I actually just took all of that to my GP and said, here's all my evidence. I would like a referral. I didn't, yeah, really give them much choice. And that's when the official kind of journey started. And my diagnosis came in March this year. So exactly 2 years after I kind of started looking into it, which I'm incredibly grateful for because I know that that journey looks so different to so many people. But yeah, almost exactly 2 years since I started looking into it, I was diagnosed by a panel because that's how they do it where I'm from. They took all of the evidence gathered over kind of 18-month worth of appointments and they took it to this panel, and a panel of experts decided that I was combined type ADHD and autistic.
Wow. Okay, so when you went to your GP, how was that response from them? Because I know a lot of people's experience going to the GP, especially if you're a woman and you present in a way that is very camouflaging and, we fit into society as they expect us to. How was that response from your GP?
I have to be honest in that I didn't have any fight whatsoever to the point I didn't even see someone in person. And I have always kind of put that down to the fact that I gave them so much evidence and
Yeah.
I wasn't going saying, oh, I think I might maybe, could we maybe look into something?
Mhm.
What do you think? Which I have done so many times, which is probably why I've been diagnosed incorrectly so many times. But I just went with all of this evidence and I said, I would like a referral for autism and ADHD diagnosis because I believe that with all this evidence, I have autism and ADHD.
Yeah.
And I actually did that on like an online thing, put so much information in, requested the referral, and
Oh,
all
wow.
I got back was an email saying your referral has been accepted or your request for referral has been accepted. We are putting that through to the mental health team. And I went through to the mental health team relatively quickly, actually.
Okay.
And I think I first went through to a nurse practitioner, and she did loads of questionnaires with me, which I know some people do at the GP. So this is why it's so different everywhere, the way that they do it. But for me, I went through to the advanced nurse practitioner, and she did lots of questionnaires, asked me lots of information. And I now know that in my first appointment with her, she was like, why is she here? I don't know why she's here. And then in my second appointment, I was having a much worse day. I was in quite a bad place. I was struggling to mask and struggling to do the whole camouflaging type thing. And she was just like, oh, okay. Because in the initial appointment, my scores were saying absolutely. How
Okay.
I was presenting was not. And then the second time she saw me, it was a different story. And the same happened with my psychiatrist, in that she was like, I don't know why you're here. And actually, by the end of that first appointment with my psychiatrist, she was like, oh, okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I know why you're here. Um, and then, yeah, my appointments were kind of fortnightly for around 18 months. It took a long time of constant appointments, digging in, covering every aspect of everything to get all the evidence gathered. So my psychiatrist saw me on great days, she saw me on
Yeah.
burnout days, she saw me in like different levels of social abilities and all that kind of thing. Um, and yeah, she was able to get like a really thorough picture of what was going on and then go from there. So yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah. So could you dis could you discuss with us what are some of your daily struggles that you battle with?
Yeah. So my main daily struggle is overwhelm. Absolutely. As a mum of two, as a
Mm.
wife, as a business owner, yeah, daily I am overwhelmed. And that is really difficult because as an autistic person, we do tend to get overwhelmed a lot. Easier is probably not the right word, but with less input than kind of an holistic person does. And so when you add in on top of that young children, noises,
Yeah.
school runs, like washing to keep up with, house to keep on top of, trying to remember to speak to human beings that are like adults as well. I'm constantly in a state of overwhelm, and that is paralyzing sometimes. I can wake up some days and feel like there's just this huge weight on my chest, and I'm like, I'm just gonna stay here, which
Yeah.
obviously isn't possible. But I don't even know where to start and how to, yeah. And because all that's in my head, even just getting out of bed and putting my clothes on takes a lot more effort because I'm having to mentally process the whole thing, the whole procedure of something I've been doing since I was a child, just because there's so much else going on in my head and in my space. And there's a lot of demands from the kind of second I open my eyes as a mum. And yeah, so overwhelm is the big one for
Yeah.
me. Um, and it's something that I pretty much say on a daily basis to my husband or my mum. I'm overwhelmed.
Yeah.
It's too much today. And that level changes as well. Some days I can be doing a lot of things and be overwhelmed because I have a lot on my plate. And other days I can be overwhelmed, like I said, with getting dressed and eating something. So it changes depending on the day. But that's probably my biggest thing, especially at the moment. I struggle. It's funny, as a late diagnosed autistic adult, I have built up a life, as you will understand, as a person who thought she just wasn't a good human. I was struggling to be a human. I wasn't, I was constantly failing. I was never meeting the mark. I was never hitting expectations. I just wasn't good at this. And learning I was autistic filled in the gaps and joined the dots. And I understand better now, but my life is still, having spent the last 30 years being undiagnosed, it's very hard to untangle all of that and realize now that it's because my brain is wired differently, and trying to pick apart the bits that I can maybe go and create a more autistic friendly way of living when I have a life set up around me that didn't know I was autistic, if that makes
Yeah.
sense. Um, so it's great having the words now to say I am autistic, and I'm finding now I can use that in situations if I'm feeling overwhelmed, rather than continuing to stay in that situation and push myself. I have the words to say, this is very overwhelming for me because I am autistic and I need to step away. But
Mm,
trying to change my daily life and the way things that have always been set up and ran, that's a lot harder. So I'm still almost trying to figure out what my daily struggles are, because a lot of it is that overwhelmed. Everything is, I don't know how to deal with anything right now. But I believe it's because I've never had the words, and now I'm still learning where actually I'm struggling because I'm autistic, and
mm,
not just I'm a terrible person and I can't deal with the world. So
yeah.
it's a juggle. I really struggle with overstimulation
Mm.
massively. My autistic side struggles with overstimulation. My ADHD side struggles with understimulation.
Oh, that's such a battle.
Yeah, so I get very overwhelmed in if I'm downstairs, one son's playing with something, the other son's playing with something else. My husband starts talking to me. I'm just like, oh my goodness, I'm going to explode. It is crazy, and the reaction sometimes is really, like, my skin will feel super itchy and I'll be like, I want to rip my skin off. I can't handle it. And it's just because there's too many noises. But the next day, or even the next hour, I can be understimulated and I'm the one that's like, let's dance, let's turn some music on, let's do something because I need to do something. But the difference I've noticed is that controlled,
Yeah.
when it's controlled, I like the loud music and I like the that kind of the overstimulation when it's controlled, but
Yeah.
the
Voice.
overstimulation, yeah, when it's not controlled, whether it's touch, whether it's different noises, even kind of changes in temperature that I'm not really
Mm,
expecting. You know, if you walk into a shop in the winter and it's freezing outside and you go in and all of a sudden you're really hot, oh, that's like,
yeah.
it's almost like an anger, like, oh no, I can't deal with this, get me out. It's a lot. So the overstimulation is really hard for me to manage. It is a whole journey of still trying to figure everything out and let myself give myself a bit of space to learn that,
Yeah.
because it's not always been, yeah, not having the words, it's not always been that easy, and my go-to has become do everything 100 miles an hour for anyone at all times,
Yeah.
because then they can't tell you you're not doing enough.
That's it.
um and it's taking a step back and saying, I don't need to do that. I need to prioritize myself, and in prioritizing myself, everyone around me is going to benefit.
That's
um,
right.
it's hard. It's really hard. I am in a space where I'm struggling still that if I say no, it affects sometimes many people.
Yeah.
Whereas if I'm just uncomfortable, it only affects me. And that's always been the way I've done things. And changing that now raises a lot of questions for a lot of people.
Mhm.
Like, well, you could do it last year, so why can't you do it this year? And I'm not sure I have the words yet to explain it in a way to them that they would understand. But what I'm trying to do is remember that I am not in control of anybody else's feelings or emotions or reactions. I'm only in charge of my own. And if in a moment where, for example, the space is too overstimulating for me and I
Mm.
need to leave, I can't think about how someone else is going to kind of react to me taking a step away and maybe going to a different room for a while. I need to focus on how I'm going to react or how that evening's going to be for me doing bedtime with my children because I've allowed myself to take too much in that time and not have enough left for later. So I'm trying to step into that place of I can only control myself and what I need right now is to step away. So yeah, it's a huge juggle.
Yeah.
It's not easy being an autistic person. It's not. Whether you understand it or not, whether you've known since you were tiny or found out 2 weeks ago, it's not easy, especially in a neurotypical world.
Yeah.
So
And like
it,
you're saying, you've got a brain that, your ADHD brain and your autism brain, they don't always want the same thing. So that makes it very hard as well.
yeah, it's a huge contradiction, my the two sides of my brain. And I think they support each other in some ways, which is great, but they very much, yeah, are at war
They're
in
like
other.
siblings.
Exactly, exactly. They're exactly like my boys. That's that's the right way to.
Okay, let's flip it. Um, can you tell me some of your like current special interests, things that give you joy, your hyperfixations that are currently going on for you?
Yes. So I have just gone through. I think it's probably teetering out, which is really sad. But I have just watched the entirety of Vampire Diaries from start to finish. And actually, I watched it from start to finish, and I wasn't ready for it to finish. So I watched the last episode and then watched the first one straight away again because then it's not finished to me, which
Yeah.
is a thing. And I was so incredibly just everything. Whenever I was speaking to like my sister, I was talking about Vampire Diaries and what was going on, and it's like they're all my friends, and it's happening in my life, and I'm like researching all the actors and finding out what they're doing now, and then I start following them on Instagram and like checking in on them daily, and yeah, so that was there. But I think that's kind of teetering, which is really sad when it comes to the end of a kind of a hyperfixation because it's almost like a grief of like, oh,
Hmm.
it's going now. Um, I've just had that. I am incredibly hyper focused, special interest. Psychology has been a lifelong one for me. I love psychology, it fascinates me. And thinking back on it now is probably because I was always trying to figure out what was different
Yeah.
about me. And yeah, it's always been some sort of, in some way, it's been there all the time. And at the moment, it's subconscious work and understanding the subconscious brain and how it works and just how fascinating it is that it's actually your subconscious that like does things like fixes a cut when you cut
Mhm.
yourself, and it's your subconscious that keeps you breathing during the night, and it's just all that fascinating stuff. And having a lot of negative beliefs and a lot of negative kind of default pathways in my brain because of the undiagnosed stuff for so long. I'm very interested in how you can change that and using neuroplasticity to create new pathways and change that. So I am reading books, I am reading research articles, I am just watching YouTubes. I'm fascinated by it. I struggle, I don't know if you're the same, but when I'm in a hyperfocus, it's very information heavy. It's like absorb as much as physically possible. There is not time to do. It's just constant, like, I want as much as possible. And that can get quite overwhelming when you take on so much information. But that has been, yeah, a huge one at the moment that I'm learning loads about. And I actually spoke to a therapist the other day, and on the phone to her, I could hear myself, and I was like, "This is her, like this is actually her job, and this is what she does." And I'm telling her. She kept saying, "Oh, I can tell that you've really done a lot of research in this." And I'm like, "Yes, yes, I have.
Yeah.
I absolutely have." So yeah, so that's been going on, and I have a huge, I guess it's a hyper focus, but it's a special interest. I'm very, very, very ambitious, and I always have been, and it's always been, whether it's been in employment, whether it's been in a business, whether it's been doing some little side hustle, whatever it's been, I'm very ambitious, and I'm doing a lot of stuff for my business, and I'm really kind of enjoying and loving providing value in things with my Instagram. I'm really enjoying content creation. I'm really enjoying giving value to people, and that's a big, I would say, more a special interest than a hyper focus, because I can see a bit of a difference with them. But I just have a huge special interest in hearing people's stories and kind of helping them to see that they don't have to be stuck, that they're not broken, that there can be a change to their story. That I'm really, really invested in that just now. And I'm really lucky to have my Instagram, which is growing, and that's amazing that I'm reaching so many new people like yourself, and able to kind of just, it helps me on my journey. It helps me every single day to remind myself that I don't have to struggle, and I don't have to be in survival mode all the time. I can have a different direction, and that for me right now is a huge passion. It's a huge special interest, and I'm just really enjoying being a part of that world, exactly like you are, the
Yeah.
educating, providing value, the showing people that you're not alone. It's, yeah, huge.
That's it. So I was actually going to ask this question right at the end, but let's just jump in halfway through. So I was going to say, where can people find you? Because I obviously find you on Instagram, and it's been lovely building up a friendship with you because you're another Scottish person, and I just love Scottish people. So yeah, just introduce what your Instagram channel is all about. Yeah, just
Yeah, so you can find me on Instagram. It's at underscore dear future Sam. And I've always loved content creation. I have done it when I was losing weight. I have done it when I was trying to just, when I started with my motherhood journey, like way back, I was posting about that. Connecting with human beings online feels safer to me than connecting in person, and I can kind of keep it at arm's length when I need to. So it's perfect for me. So I have created Dear Future Sam over there. And since I was diagnosed, I have been posting every single day just about real stuff, the real things, not the things you see on a, like on an assessment sheet, the criteria. Actually, I'm experiencing this on a daily basis, or I've just had this happen. Does this happen to anyone else? And just trying to be really real with it. I started it purely to process. I'm a verbal processor, and it was helping me if I was learning stuff or if something was coming up, I was chatting it through. And I noticed that my husband was getting a bit bored of always chatting it through with me. So I thought, well, I'll just do it to myself. And actually, through doing that, I have found, I think at the moment, something like, well, over 8,000 people who resonate with that and who feel similarly. And yeah, like meeting people like you, chatting with people, helping people who have had, like you said at the start, GPs who've refused them help, and
mm,
kind of what I did and how they could maybe try other ways. Or I've had discussions with people about medication. I have had so many people, and this brings a tear to my eye. I've had mums, I've had dads, I've had friends, I've had partners message me because their loved one has
mm,
either just been diagnosed or is getting a diagnosis or is considering it, and asking me how they can support them, or saying how grateful they are to me for sharing because they're able to understand their loved one better because
yeah,
of what I'm sharing. And that is absolutely incredible. I never expected it to become what it has, but it's amazing. I just, I'm absolutely blown away after feeling so alone for my whole life, to all of a sudden have 8,000 other human beings or aliens, whatever we are, all like connecting and connecting over a shared experience that I always thought I was alone in.
yeah. Everyone check her out. She's fantastic, and she is very raw. She's very real in what she shares. and it's so relatable. And okay, I have another question for you. How does being neurodivergent affect your um, ability to make friendships, build friendships, your relationships with other people? Talk us through that.
So hugely. In one word? Yeah, absolutely enormous impact. I am 30, and apart from the wonderful people that I've been connecting with over here, like yourself, I have kind of one friend um in my life, and she has been there literally since I was born. Our mums are friends, our parents are friends. We come from that group of family kind of friends, and we've just always been each other's life. And we were best friends growing up, and we're still best friends now. But she is my one and only like actual 3D friend. It's crazy. I think, as neurodivergent people, either fall into the wrong groups of friends or keep ourselves away because we're scared. I think I'm now realizing that all that's happened is I've never found the right group of people. And now that I'm starting to find people who are more like me, I shared a video the other day that I'm a big oversharer. And I've always said that. I've always said I overshare. And then actually what I've realized recently is I'm not oversharing if I'm talking to the right people. If I'm talking to people who care and who people who are interested in me and want to know me, it's not oversharing.
Yeah.
It's allowing people to get to know the real me. And that's big. That's been a big realization for me. But I've never had a good time when it comes to friendships. As a child, I was very badly bullied for all sorts of reasons. For having curly hair was one of them. I had what was diagnosed as deaf or deafness and hearing impairments. I'm now thinking it was actually auditory processing. I really struggled with that. So people would say that I was ignoring them, or even the teachers would accuse me of ignoring them. And then when I was in high school age and onward, I always got on better with guys. Always easier, less drama, less like confusing things going on. So I just got on better with guys. I was in scouts. I loved making fires. I loved playing in the woods. I used to sail. Everyone was kind of a guy in the sailing world when I was doing it was just easier. But I got to an age where guys didn't just want to be my friends anymore. And it became very clear to me how to keep a guy friend and not lose a friend, which got me in some really horrible situations, which I feel quite a lot of emotion when I look back and think of like the younger version of me thinking that she had to do those things to just keep a friend, which is insane. And then got to an age where I just was always in some sort of relationship, like romantic relationship, whether it was with the right person or not. And quite often it was not with the right person. I was taken advantage of a lot, but didn't have any friends. I had relationships and would, I guess, make myself needed in those relationships. But I think what I was desperately trying to do was never be alone and never feel rejected, because that was something that kept coming up over and over again, was no matter how much I gave, I would always end up being rejected or losing that friendship, relationship, whatever. And then yeah, it kind of is still the same to this day. Not with the relationship wise. I am married now, happily, but I don't know how to make a friend. I don't know what to say. I'm terrified of being rejected. I am terrified of doing the whole oversharing thing and then trusting far too soon. My husband says I'm quite naive when it comes to that, and I'll open up and trust very easily. And
Yeah.
then quite often that's got me hurt or in a bad situation. Um, so yeah, relationships, friendships, romantic, it's a big old confusing
Yeah.
thing. It's something I definitely haven't figured out yet, but I'm trying. Like I was saying earlier, just finding people who know the real me and
Yeah.
who aren't afraid when I overshare and who don't disappear and who don't reject me if I'm having a bad day, or as you know, if I take a week to respond to a message, they don't take it as a personal attack. They realize actually that's just Sam's. Sometimes she doesn't have the capacity to reply. Sometimes she's missed the message entirely because that also happens. But yeah, the people I'm surrounding myself with now are people who know me because I'm starting to know me and I'm starting to meet the real me. So I can be that with people and keep myself safe because if people don't accept that, rather than people pleasing and doing everything possible
Right.
to make them like me, I'm now strong enough or I'm getting there to kind of say, that's fine. I'm not everyone's cup of tea, but I don't have to be everyone's cup of tea and kind of stepping away. So it sounds very sad and very, very lonely. And it it is horrible to not have the friendships. And my goodness, have I craved them? And I think that's why I do get obsessions with things like Vampire Diaries and stuff, because in a way it gives me the feeling of having friends, which does sound really sad, but it does without all the horrible, like hurtful things that have happened to me with actually having the real deal. So yeah.
Do you feel like when you meet people now, you have a transparency and openness about being autistic, being neurodivergent? Do you kind of let them know quite early on?
I do, but then I stumble.
Okay.
I don't like. So I'm very happy now, and I like to say quite early on, I'm autistic.
Okay.
I think I do it because I know myself and I know that there's every chance that I will say the wrong thing or I will overshare or I'll start fiddling with a fidget toy. And I do those things. Having said to someone I'm autistic, they can kind of go, oh, okay, she's autistic. Having not said it, people still do that whole judgmental thing that makes me very uncomfortable. So I like to almost give them that answer before it reveals itself anyway. But I will say I'm autistic, and then if anybody questions it, even though I talk on a daily basis on my Instagram, and I think people, I have lovely comments from people saying how well I explain things, but I seem to be able to explain things very well for autistic people. For neurotypical or holistic people, I feel like I'm speaking French, in all honesty. And so I've not quite got there yet
Yeah.
in knowing what comes after I'm autistic. And I think sometimes it does come across like I'm autistic, like just just so you know.
Yeah.
I want to open up the conversation. I want to help break down the stigma. I want to help people understand, but I'm very much still understanding.
Hmm.
And I think until I have a better understanding as an autistic person, I'm not going to be able to even start sharing it to a neurotypical or holistic person who doesn't have the same understanding or the same brain.
Yeah, and I feel like when you share with a neurotypical, like you're saying, you have to give education because people don't really know what it means to be autistic or to be neurodivergent. They have their own perception of what that means by looking at movies or they knew a 5-year-old boy who was obsessed with trains and that's kind of what they fixate on their brain. They're like, you're not like them. And it's just hard to educate because it's not just education about neurodiversity, it's education on how that specifically affects you and what your traits are and what your passions are. And it's a bit exhausting because sometimes people they're like, oh, I didn't ask for all this information. You know, you either info dump on them or you're not reading the signals right. Do you find that like sometimes you're just going over and over the same
Completely.
kind of conversations?
Yeah, I have felt, as I think the majority of the late diagnosed community have, I felt so misunderstood my entire life. And I over explain because of that.
Yeah.
And I come up with 10 different ways to try and explain one thing, which I'll probably say in one sentence because I'm so desperate to be understood and to be heard. And I definitely find myself doing that now. And like you say, a lot of the time they don't even want to know.
Yeah.
They just don't want to know. I found it incredibly difficult after my diagnosis. It was such a life-changing like bombshell, and nothing changed in
Yeah.
regards to the people around me, my family, my in-laws. I remember telling them, and I remember actually my father-in-law's partner saying specifically, "Oh, but it doesn't change who you are."
Mm.
And I kind of sat there like,
Jeez.
it changes everything,
Yeah.
everything about who I am. It actually is the exact opposite. Like it proves that who I am is not actually who I am.
Yeah. You have to relearn who you are, basically.
Yeah,
So we've known.
exactly. And that was huge. And it felt incredibly isolating all of a sudden to be like, no, but none of you understand this, and you're never going to. And I don't have the words or the energy to try and educate you on this. But I also feel a huge sense of responsibility, I guess, as an autistic person, and as an autistic person who's quite happy to be open and to share, that I feel a responsibility to be part of that, changing the stigma,
Yeah.
changing the way that everybody like sees us, and yeah, changing the information that's out there. And I yeah, have come away from a few conversations just being like, why didn't I say that differently? Why didn't I do that in a better way? Because I just don't feel like I'm doing the community justice when I'm not able to. But I'm getting there. I'm getting there. And like you say, it's probably a balance between providing the right information
Mm.
and not providing too much,
Yeah.
because we learn every single detail about every single symptom,
Yeah.
and actually just saying, "Oh, I get this," or just saying the symptom might be enough rather than all of the science and the ins and outs and the everything to do with it. But that's not us. So it's hard.
Yeah, I think like when you said people want to know how it affects them. So like people don't care that we're autistic or neurodivergent. They don't care until our accommodations affect them. The accommodations that we ask people, like if we're struggling with noise, so we ask people to turn the music down or something like that, and we're trying to be our own advocate. And it's taken our whole life to speak up for ourselves and actually put ourselves in a position where we have worth, and people don't care until, oh, actually I have to do something for you now, and they don't like that, especially if they've known us before and they've gone through that journey of like, I've never needed to help you before, why do I need to help you now? And it's like, because my whole life I've never been able to ask for help. So
Yeah, and I heard someone say the other day, and it's huge, that advocating doesn't make it go away. You
yeah.
can you can do so many things. You can wear noise cancelling headphones to the shop and still be able to go and
Yeah.
do the shopping, but that doesn't mean that the shopping is not hard anymore. So yeah, it's really difficult. We do live in a neurotypical world, and it's not made for our brains at all. And it's hard to get the accommodations, and it's hard to advocate for ourselves, because people, they ultimately, as a race, we're selfish. We
Yeah.
want to put ourselves first. And as neurodivergent people, we have learned that we're not acceptable to do that. We're not acceptable to be here. We can't hold any space as ourselves. So it's a huge relearning to actually kind of get into that more selfish zone and be like
Yeah.
I was saying earlier, I don't care what your reaction is to this, because I need to put myself first. And actually, at the moment, I do very much care. And it's incredibly uncomfortable for me to see someone. I'm incredibly hypervigilant, and I can see a very small change in body language. And if I
Mhm.
see that, before I'd be like, oh, but it's okay. Blah, 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 and I'd quickly like swallow my words and just ignore it. Whereas now I am sitting with that discomfort and being like, it is short lived. 20 minutes of being uncomfortable, I
Mhm.
would rather take than the next 3 days of feeling completely overwhelmed and even burnt out because I
Yeah.
put myself in that situation. So it's choosing the hard, it's choosing the discomfort, and realizing that we're never going to please everyone. We are going to be putting other people out now that we're saying, actually, I need help.
Yeah.
But we're finally giving ourselves the permission and the voice to do that, and that's okay. So
Mm. Still learning, but yeah, we're all on a
yeah,
journey with that one.
definitely.
So my last question for you is, what advice would you give to someone who is seeking an autism diagnosis? Like potentially they are self-diagnosed, or they just have this thought about themselves because they've done a lot of research and they're not quite sure whether they should go for an official diagnosis or not. What would you advise them?
So one of the first things I would do, especially if you are thinking about going for the official diagnosis, is ask yourself what you're hoping to get from that official diagnosis. Because for me, it is a very long and difficult process. And had I known that actually getting the diagnosis wasn't really going to change anything,
Yeah.
I would have done everything so much different. So sit down and actually say to yourself, what is it I am hoping to get from a diagnosis? Because I can tell you now, it is not a silver bullet answer. And if you're like me, you will get no support. I think some areas do provide after kind of diagnosis support. I haven't had any. There's no medication for autism, so you won't get anything like that. You will get the ability to potentially get some support, be it with things like disability benefits, be it with things like work. You can actually go with them with that diagnosis and say, I now have this, which backs up. So you have to kind of listen to me when I'm asking for accommodations. So it will give you those things. So there are a lot of things you can do for yourself while you're waiting for a diagnosis, or if you decide not to get one at all. So I would say find people on social media you resonate with. Go out there on Google, on YouTube, get the information. Don't just watch the videos that say, oh, do you have these 5 things? Oh, well, then you might be autistic. Actually, listen to people's daily experience. Listen to women who have never presented in the usual way
Yeah.
of autism and how they are finding their daily lives and the things that are going on for them and potentially what they are able to do, how they're supporting themselves, what accommodations they've asked for at work, or what they do in their household to try and make it a more autistic friendly place and do those things. You do not need a label to support yourself. You do not need a label to understand yourself better. You know yourself better than anyone. I would like to say I sought a diagnosis because I would never have believed myself. I would
Yeah.
have never let myself say to anyone, I am autistic without that. And I do know that that's a big barrier for people. But you can do so much for yourself in the process, during the process. I spoke to someone last week who joined a waiting list and was told 5 years and is now 10 years for a
Oh,
diagnosis.
that
So,
NHS.
yeah.
Wow.
So, if you think what changes you could make to your life and how you could better support yourself if you started to do that now, or if you waited 10 years to get a bit of, I didn't even get a bit of paper, but to get someone to say, yes, you're autistic,
Yeah.
like you could do so much in that time. So I completely support like self-diagnosis 100%. I completely support people who need the diagnosis because I was one of those people.
Yeah.
But the reality of the situation right now is that it's really, really hard to get one. And it should not be the barrier that stops things changing for you. Buy the headphones. Like, buy the headphones. Try to start. I now dress. Dressing was a huge one for me.
Yeah.
I used to try and wear jeans and things that were fashionable and whatever else. I recently went out and bought myself this kind of like joggers and hoodie in about 4 different colors, and that's just what I wear because I don't have to think about what I'm putting on in the morning. It matches, it's comfortable, it supports me sensory wise. It that is an accommodation I've made for myself that anyone can make. If you like need to stop going out Saturday and Sunday because it's too overwhelming. If you need to not be in a huge family gathering, it's about to be Christmas. How many autistic people spend every single Christmas absolutely like burnt out and struggling because they're changing what they eat, they're changing what they wear, they're going to noisy environments, they're changing their routines. You don't have to do those things.
Yeah.
You don't have to say to someone, I'm autistic, so I can't do these things. But you can say, I'm putting myself first, and I'm not going to come to that gathering,
Mhm.
or I'm going to go, but I'm going to stay for an hour, and then I'm going to leave. Make the accommodations for yourself. You do not need the label to start doing that. And I wish I had known
Yeah.
and supported myself sooner than I did.
Yeah, you're totally right because I always had this thought of like it's good to know, but at the
Mhm.
end of the day, it really isn't important whether you're autistic or not. It's whether you know yourself. And when you get to know yourself and where your struggles are, what your triggers are, and then figuring out what you can put in place to help you, that's when you start to thrive in this world. And yet, wearing the clothes that are comfier, avoiding events that you know you're not going to actually enjoy, but you're just going to do it for the sake of other people, literally just listen and tune into your own psyche and make life easier for yourself regardless of having a diagnosis. So yeah, I think that's really good advice actually.
Definitely. And it be okay with being uncomfortable for a while because starting to do these things for
Yeah.
yourself, it's not an overnight, I'm autistic and therefore I'm okay with doing all these things. Oh my goodness, no. Not only am I still processing my diagnosis, I am still highly uncomfortable with the majority of the things I'm trying to do to support myself.
Yeah.
But I know that they are for the best and they are for the best long term. And I would much rather take the short term discomfort than spend the rest of my life feeling like I was shoving myself into a box to try and dull myself down for the rest of the world because I don't want to do that anymore. So
Well, thank you so much, Sam, for joining us today. I hope my subscribers and viewers have learned a few more things today. Thank you, Sam.
thank you for having me.